Chapter 12 Light in the Dark. What little light remained in the sky filtered through layers of water and glinted off the mermaid's scales so they looked like constellations. Cece touched Corinne's hand, and everything burst into color. She pulled away in surprise, and it all went dark again. If I don't hold your hand, I can't take you, Cece said. She took Corinne's hand again, and the seafloor lit up. Even the dull sand looked like it was covered with tiny colored jewels. It's beautiful, Corinne said. What is? Drew asked. It's too dark to see much. Can't they see what I can? Corinne asked Cece. How are you doing that? I'm not doing anything, Cece said. You are. It's not working for them. Drew, Buki, and Malik were brighter than Corinne had ever seen them. The brown tones of their skin glowed orange, red, and purple in some places. Their nails were pink as seashells, and their hair drifted around them in dozens of shades of black and brown. Amazing, Corinne whispered. What? Drew asked again. You're so bright, Corinne said. It's like you light up in the dark. I could hardly see you, Drew said. Must be a Jumbie thing, grumbled Buki. Corinne's stomach flipped as if she had suddenly been turned upside down by his words. But he was right. She was different from the others. Her mermaid pulled her along. Cece's hand was so cold it was like holding on to a block of ice. It made Corinne's fingers numb, but she hardly noticed. Corinne could now see that each mermaid had subtle patterns in her tail. The gold stripe on Ellie was made up of varying metallic shades. Noe's tail was covered in spiral whorls in every imaginable shade of blue. Cece's yellow tail contained intricate patterns of green, red, brown, and orange. The mermaids took them past fields of coral, bright as flower gardens. A leatherback turtle looked up at them as they passed. Something even larger and slower lumbered in the distance. When the mermaid got close enough, Corinne held out her hand and brushed the rough skin of a kind-looking grayish-blue creature. What is it? Corinne asked. Don't these fish know anything? Asked Noe. They're not like us, said Addie as she tugged Malik along. They've probably never seen one before. One what? Buki asked. A manatee, Noe said. You mean there are things swimming right around us? He asked. What are you called? Cece asked Corinne. Corinne quickly introduced herself and her friends. Why do we need to know each other's names? Noe said. She adjusted Buki in the crook of her arm. We are your transportation. That is already a very undignified thing to be. We're not going to be your friends, too. Why not? Ellie and Drew asked together. Then they looked at each other with surprise and giggled. If you like them so much, here, you can carry mine, Noe said. She tossed Buki toward Ellie and stopped swimming. Buki began to gasp as if he suddenly needed to breathe. His eyes opened wide, and he tried to swim for the surface. Brother! Malik called out. Corinne pulled away from Cece, and instantly she also began to gasp for air. Cece rolled her eyes and caught Corinne again. Then she doubled back for Buki and tossed him to Noe, who was flipping her tail as though watching Buki drown was no concern of hers. Buki seemed fine once he was with Noe again. This time he held tight to her arm. Noe grinned. Hear how quiet the sea is now? Ellie and Addie smiled, but didn't really seem to enjoy her joke. How long will it take to get there? Corinne asked. I don't know, Cece said. Cece moved closer to the surface under a mass of floating plants in shades of yellow and orange. Corinne caught clumps of it between her fingers. Sargassum, the mermaid explained. She slipped some into her mouth. Tasty. She held a piece toward Corinne. Corinne smiled and shook her head. A thin, curving line, a paler shade of blue than the surrounding water, appeared in front of them. What's that? The current, Cece said. That's the path Mama Delo made for us to follow. Corinne started to ask another question, but Cece turned to Noe, Addie, and Ellie and said something in their watery language. Addie hummed a long note. Then Ellie and the others joined in with harmonies that rose and crashed. The music was soothing, and Corinne's eyes began to grow heavy. Her friends' bodies went limp, and their heads drooped as they fell asleep. The last things Corinne remembered from that night were the sargassum that thinned and gave way to the vast navy blue sea, and the shadows on the very edges of her vision that darted, dipped, turned, and twisted as if they were testing the boundaries around the mermaids. Every moment, the shadows inched closer. Chapter 13: Shadows in the Sea. The mermaid's singing tapered off once the children were all asleep. Cece held on to the last note as it flowed out to sea and bounced off something moving in the distance. A feeling of dread vibrated through her body, beginning at her belly and extending to the tips of her tail and the top of her head. Mama had created the current to take them all the way to whatever home it was she said they would know. They were to stick to the current. They would be safe inside it. But she never said anything about creatures that might encroach on them. She never told them what they should do if something went wrong. Cece's heart fluttered in her chest. Mama Jalou would not have sent them if she thought they would be harmed. Cece swam faster anyway. These people fish are twitchy, Noe said, readjusting Buki in her arms. This one's making noises, Addie said, giggling. Just hold them tight, Cece said. Nothing will happen, Ellie said. Mama said. Mama is not here, said Cece. I don't even hear her song. Do you? Cece felt the bodies of her sister mermaids stiffen, and they moved faster too. The low moan of a whale rang through the water. It dove into deep notes and rose again to mid-range tones, like a mournful song. A higher moan answered it, a baby, mimicking the undulating sounds of its mother and adding its own variation. A moment later, the mermaids came upon the graceful mammals, moving gently through the water despite their large size. Their crusty heads and dark gray bodies glided past. The mother barely noticed the mermaids, but the little whale, longer than Noe, turned and gave them a wide-eyed glance. Addie and Ellie hummed a harmony of mournful notes and caught the baby's attention. He came toward them. It's only a whale family, Ellie said. They're friendly. Cece didn't feel better. She went ahead as the others swam in looping twists with the young whale until its mother let out a long, resonant note that called the baby to her side. Cece felt something pressing in. She looked back to hurry her sisters, but they had slipped out of the stream in their game with the whale. As the current pulled Cece, they were being left behind. What are you doing? Get back in the current. Noe looked surprised. She grabbed her sisters one at a time and tried to swing them back into the path of the stream, but they were too far out. Cece set her jaw and swam out of the stream toward them. We have to get back, she said. Your games will knock us off course. What are you so worried about? Noe asked. Nothing happened. Mama's current is right. Long, bright red tentacles rose up in front of the mermaids like stalks. The tentacles twisted as they rose, showing white undersides covered with hundreds of suckers that opened and closed like mouths, each one independent of its neighbors. The tentacles waved like an eyeless horde searching for food. Cece flipped her fin in the other direction, trying to stop, but she was moving too fast. Instead, she tumbled head over tail and just missed one thick, blistering red tentacle that had popped up a few feet in front of her face. Each tentacle was at least as thick as Mama Jalou's tail and much longer. Beneath them, the body of the squid was still hidden in the shadowy depths. Keep back, Cece told the others, but the tentacles had already sensed the mermaid's movement in the water and were reaching toward them. The mermaids angled backward to avoid the waving arms of the squid. Noe dove while Addie and Ellie split in opposite directions. The squid moved toward the other three, so Cece couldn't see her sisters past the probing tentacles. She surged forward and bumped into Addie, knocking Corinne and Malik together. Cece and Addie untangled the children's limbs and moved again as one tentacle wiggled toward them. This time, Cece twisted down and around as Addie went up. She could see the entire bulk of the beast now. It was as long as the mama whale and thicker. Its head pointed like a spear towards Cece as its tentacles waved above. Its large black eyes looked right through her, but its body remained still, as if waiting to pounce. Behind her, Ellie screamed. One of the tentacles had wrapped around her tail. She held Drew away from her body, looking for someone to pass her to. Addie and Noe dodged the other suckers, pulling Malik's and Buki's arms out of the way of danger as they tried to reach Ellie. But with the children to carry, the mermaids weren't as agile as usual. Noe passed Buki to Addie and managed to navigate the field of tentacles to get to Ellie. She tried to pry Ellie loose. Cece dove and rammed herself into the squid's rubbery body. She bounced off and turned for another attack. The squid reached for her. Cece stopped short and changed direction. Corinne's head bounced and lolled. As Cece turned, she saw Noe pull Ellie out of the squid's grip, but glittering scales and dark red blood trailed behind them. What if we dropped these fish to distract it? Noe suggested. They will drown, Cece said. Not if the squid eats them first. Noe replied. Leave them with me, Ellie said. I can't go fast anyway. She pressed her hand against the bleeding gash in her tail. I'll swim for the current, you lead it away, and then come back. Ellie's blood was sure to attract other predators. You have to get back to the current fast, said Cece. You will never survive alone. Ellie scooped the children in her arms and aimed for the current. Cece darted ahead of the other two mermaids, dodging tentacles as the squid reached up for them. When they were far enough out, Cece doubled back with Addie. Noe hung back and punched the squid a couple of times before she moved on. The squid released black ink and darted off. As the water cleared, Cece, Noe, and Addie spotted a shiver of sharks closing in on Ellie and the children. All three moved as fast as they could, but it was too late. Corinne woke up. Her eyes widened and her mouth dropped open in a scream. The vibration distracted a couple of the smaller sharks, but the largest continued to follow Ellie. Cece lowered her head and moved like a dart through the water. Corinne took a slingshot from the pocket of Buki. She used it to launch something at the shark. The beast whipped off in another direction. Cece got close enough to pull Corinne and Drew from Ellie. The other mermaids took Buki and Malik, leaving Ellie to swim on her own. Blood still flowed from her tail in a steady stream. The shark came around again. This time, Corinne pulled a piece of coral from Cece's hair and hoisted the slingshot. She waited for the shark to get closer. It closed its eyes and opened its jaws. Rows of white teeth stuck out of its pink gums. Corinne fired and hit it right at the tip of the nose. The beast thrashed and missed them completely. It turned and disappeared like the others. Cece carried the children to Mama Jalot's stream, where the water pulled them along faster than they could swim. Mama had been right, and here they were safe. The force of the faster water shook Buki awake. He stretched and turned as much as Noe allowed him to. Then he looked at Ellie. What happened to her? He asked.